You might think you know Henry VIII, the king famous for his 6 wives and the founding of the Church of England. Hold on tight, because the real story behind Henry VIII is far darker and far more disturbing than any history textbook will ever admit. This is the shocking truth about Henry VIII, a king whose bizarre eating habits, ruthless paranoia, and nightmarish treatment of his wives make the most twisted plots of modern TV dramas seem like children's bedtime stories. In fact, it became a form of punishment among the royal household to tend to the king's legs. This wasn't just a minor bump or bruise. He was unconscious for 2 whole hours, an eternity in medieval medicine, practically a death sentence. That injury likely triggered massive personality changes. It explains how the once charismatic and athletic young king transformed into a paranoid, rage-filled monster as the years went on. They literally drew straws to decide who would be forced to get close enough to clean the wounds, a gruesome task that no one wanted. But Henry probably also suffered from Cushing's syndrome, a hormonal disorder that could explain his rapid weight gain, his mood swings, and the stubborn leg ulcers that refused to heal. His doctors were so terrified of displeasing him that they dared not suggest he was seriously ill. Criticizing the king's health was considered treason. It's hard to imagine a king reduced to such a horrific state, a ruler whose very body seemed to revolt against itself. The king could barely move from one room to another without soiling himself. This was the very same man who ordered executions over mere slights, who ruthlessly eliminated anyone who displeased him, sometimes just for looking at him the wrong way. From the grotesque reality of his physical decline to the terror he inflicted on those around him, you're about to uncover facts that will forever change how you see England's most infamous monarch. This was a man so grotesquely obese in his later years that he needed mechanical contraptions just to get around his own castle. A ruler whose own body betrayed him in the most horrifying ways, whose festering wounds smelled so vile that servants would flee in disgust, unable to bear the stench. A monarch so ravaged by disease and decay that even after death, his corpse caused chaos, so much so that his coffin exploded during his funeral procession, showering his decaying remains all over the hearse. Forget the sanitized versions of history you might have heard. By the end of his life, Henry VIII wasn't the powerful, regal figure you might imagine. He was literally a walking corpse. His waistline ballooned to an unfathomable 54 inches, wider than the height of most people alive then. He weighed close to 400 pounds at a time, when the average man barely tipped the scales at 140. But the horror didn't stop there. His legs were covered in massive, festering ulcers, open wounds that never healed, oozing pus, and emitting a stench so overpowering that courtiers would hold perfumed handkerchiefs over their noses just to endure his presence. Some chroniclers even wrote that the smell could be detected from several rooms away. These weren't minor injuries or simple sores. They were wounds so severe and putrid that servants dreaded the task of dressing them. And there's even more to the story. Modern medical experts suspect that Henry suffered a catastrophic brain injury in 1536 during a jousting accident. You won't find this kind of detail in school history classes by the end of his life. Henry was so debilitated that royal attendants had to carry him around on specially designed chairs. If you think Henry's physical decline was shocking, wait until you hear about the horrors his wives endured. Everyone knows Henry VIII had 6 wives and famously executed 2 of them. But the reality of what these women faced was far worse than simple beheadings. The psychological torture inflicted on them would make modern horror writers blush. Take Anne Boleyn, for example. Before her execution, Henry didn't simply order her death. He orchestrated an elaborate and cruel frame-up. He forced her own court musician to confess under torture that he had an affair with her, a lie designed to justify her downfall. But here's the truly sick twist. Henry made and watch as 5 men, including her own brother, were brutally executed for supposedly having relationships with her. Resisting could mean not just your own execution, but the destruction of your entire family. Today's competitive eaters would pale in comparison to this man's daily consumption. Henry VIII didn't just eat like a king. He ate like he was trying to single-handedly cause a famine. Imagine the terror of standing there, knowing you are next. Witnessing innocent people die because of your husband's paranoid fantasies. Then there's Catherine Howard, Henry's teenage bride, who fared even worse. When Henry discovered her past relationships, he didn't just execute her. He passed a law that made it treasonous for anyone to marry the king without revealing their sexual history. Yes, he rewrote English law because his teenage wife wasn't a virgin. It's a level of pettiness so extreme it boggles the mind. Henry's psychological abuse was just as terrifying as his physical violence. One day, he would shower his wives with lavish gifts and affection. The next, he would ignore them completely or threaten their lives. And of Cleves, terrified of what the king might do, agreed to a fake annulment just to avoid execution. She had to pretend their marriage never happened and thank Henry for the privilege of sparing her life. Jane Seymour, the lucky one, died of natural causes after giving birth to Henry's only legitimate son. But even before her body was cold, Henry was eyeing his next wife, planning marriage just 9 days after Jane's funeral. Catherine of Aragon, his first wife, spent her final years effectively under house arrest, forbidden from seeing her beloved daughter Mary. Henry spread vicious rumors that she was mentally unstable, and she died alone, possibly poisoned, writing letters to Henry that he never bothered to read. You might find it hard to believe, but Henry forced some of his wives to sign documents agreeing to their own divorces or annulments. Henry treated human beings like disposable objects, and his wives had no real escape. Divorce was impossible. Running away meant death. If you think that's shocking, wait until you hear about Henry's eating habits. They were absolutely insane. Today's competitive eaters would pale in comparison to this man's daily consumption. Henry VIII didn't just eat like a king. He ate like he was trying to single-handedly cause a famine. You don't learn this in history class. But Henry was so paranoid that he banned certain foods from his court, not because they were unhealthy, but because he considered them beneath his royal status. His entire kingdom was transformed into a surveillance state that would make modern dictators envious. Common foods like turnips and barley were literally illegal at his table, even though they probably would have been better for his health than all the meat and sugar he devoured daily. And despite his body literally falling apart from his gluttony, Henry kept eating more and more, convinced that his royal status made him immune to any consequences. Informants watched informants, building a twisted web of suspicion where no one knew who to trust. Court life became a psychological horror show where one wrong word could mean death. But Henry's paranoia wasn't limited to food. By the final years of his reign, his distrust of everyone had reached terrifying levels. Henry slept with loaded crossbows by his bedside and kept daggers under his pillow. But even that wasn't enough. He had armed guards stationed inside his bedroom, watching him sleep every single night, so he could escape if assassins came for him. He installed peepholes in walls to spy on his own courtiers, and planted listening devices in meeting rooms to eavesdrop on private conversations. Imagine being so terrified of assassination that you couldn't close your eyes without witnesses. He had spies watching Princess Mary and Princess Elizabeth, convinced they plotted to overthrow him. His own daughters treated like enemy agents in their own home. The palace itself was a fortress of fear. Henry ordered secret passages built in every building he lived in, not for romance or convenience. And here's the truly insane part. Henry created a network of spies whose sole job was to spy on his other spies. His food paranoia was equally extreme. Not only did he have multiple food tasters, but every meal was prepared in sealed kitchens, guarded at every step. Salt, spices, even the water were tested by different people. Eating a meal was a military operation. Henry's distrust extended to his own children. His paranoia became so toxic that he started executing people for crimes they had deigned to even committed, sometimes based solely on dreams or rumors. The Tower of London was constantly filled with prisoners, whose only crime was being near Henry during one of his paranoid episodes. Nobles spied on each other. Servants betrayed their masters for imaginary rewards, and everyone lived in constant fear of being the next victim of the king's delusions. The terrifying thing is that Henry's paranoia infected his entire court. Henry VIII was so committed to chaos that even his corpse caused mayhem. Servants had to carry him everywhere using specially designed chairs with pulleys and wheels. His leg wounds were so infected that chunks of rotting flesh literally fell off as he was moved. Servants had to follow behind him, cleaning up the disgusting trail. And just when you think this nightmare would end with his death, think again. The stench was so overwhelming that even doctors who were used to medieval horrors had to leave the room to vomit. No one dared get close enough to confirm his death officially. In his final weeks, he was so massive he couldn't walk. Henry's corpse was so bloated with gases from internal decomposition that his coffin had to be specially reinforced. The gases inside his decomposing body built up so much pressure that the lead lining burst open and his rotting remains splattered all over the inside of the hearse. The smell was so horrific that the procession had to stop while servants cleaned the disgusting mess with buckets and rags. Wrapped in lead sheets and sealed in multiple wooden boxes. They thought they had contained the mess. When he finally died, his body was swollen to grotesque proportions. The skin stretched tight and shiny. But the horror didn't stop there. During the funeral procession from London to Windsor Castle, something extraordinary happened. And here is a detail that will haunt your nightmares. Dogs were reportedly seen licking up Henry's remains that leaked from his coffin onto the road. The man who claimed to rule by divine right ended up as dog food on a country highway. Even his burial was a disaster. They had to dig an extra-wide grave to fit the massive coffin. But the soil kept collapsing because it couldn't support the weight of all that lead and decaying flesh. Some claimed it was his ghost, but historians believe it was just gases escaping from his continuously decomposing body. It took multiple attempts just to bury the king and keep his remains underground. The chaos didn't end there. For years afterward, locals reported strange noises and terrible smells coming from Henry's tomb. And here's one final chilling fact. Several servants who handled Henry's corpse died within weeks of infection, likely caught from contact with his rotting flesh. There are plenty more horrifying royal secrets that textbooks conveniently leave out. And trust me, you haven't heard the worst yet. So there you have it. The real Henry VIII, not the charismatic figure of legend, but a walking disaster whose body betrayed him just as brutally as he betrayed those around him. A man consumed by paranoia and gluttony who turned one of Europe's greatest kingdoms into his own personal nightmare. The most powerful man in England became a prisoner of his decaying flesh, and even death couldn't end his reign of terror. Henry's legacy isn't just the Church of England or his 6 wives. It's a chilling lesson in how absolute power can transform a human being into something truly monstrous. If these disturbing truths about Henry VIII made you question everything you thought you knew about history, hit that subscribe button. There are plenty more horrifying royal secrets that textbooks conveniently leave out. And trust me, you haven't heard the worst yet.